Hello everyone and welcome to Siksha. This is class 9 science and we are studying the chapter the fundamental unit of life part 2. So why part 2? Because we have already discussed the class on this chapter. So what did we exactly discuss last class? Let's have a quick look on that. Okay. So last class we discussed that all organisms are made of cells. Maybe one cell or maybe more than one cell. If an organism is made of only one cell, if it has only one cell, then those kind of organisms are known as single cell organism or unicellular organism, and if it has more than one cell, then multicellular organisms. Now these cells are of different shapes and different sizes. That is, in a multicellular organisms, the cells may be of different shapes and different sizes. So why are they of different shapes and different sizes? Because they perform different functions. So depending on the functions they perform, they may be of different shapes and different sizes. Now how do they perform these functions? Via division of labor. Just like in a human being, we have different organs, different limbs to perform different functions. Similarly, in a cell also has different components which are responsible for various functions, and these components are known as cell organelles. Yes, this is everything that we discussed last class. I even wrote a summary here. Okay, so this was everything about last class. Now what are we going to discuss in our today's class? So let us look into the points of what we will be discussing in our today's class. So in our today's class, we will be studying about the structural organization of a cell. Okay. Then we have plasma membrane. Then number 3, we have processes responsible for movement of substances. When we say processes responsible for movement of substances, it is with respect to the cell. Okay. So the processes responsible for movement of substances in and out of a cell. And then lastly, we will be discussing hypotonic, hypertonic and isotonic solutions. Okay. So let us start with the structural organization of a cell. Now, what is the structural organization of a living organism? For example, human beings. What is our structural organization? So living beings or human beings are made of cells. Yes. So can we say that the structural organization of a human being are cells? Keeping it in framing the sentence in a simpler sense, we can say that living beings, human beings are made of cells. If we take a thin slice of our skin, for example, and observe it under the microscope, then we will see that the part of the skin is made up of cells. Okay, there are many kinds of cells. Okay, and it makes up a small part of our skin. Okay, but what does a cell made of? What is the structural organization of a cell? If we take one particular cell and observe it under a microscope, what will we see? What is the structural organization of one particular cell? What is a particular cell made of? So there are 3 features. Okay, let's see here. There are 3 features. There are 3 features which are present in almost every cell. Now, focus here, almost every cell. Not all cells, we will have few exceptions where these kind of features may not be present. But keeping the exceptions aside, in almost every cell, we will find these 3 features. What are the 3 features? We have number 1, plasma membrane, number 2, nucleus, and number 3, cytoplasm. So have a look at this cell. This is the general representation of a cell. Okay. Let us take this to be a cell. The outermost covering of the cell, the outermost protective covering of a cell is known as the plasma membrane. Okay. And in the center part, we have the nucleus, and a fluid substance is also present which is known as the cytoplasm. So what is a plasma membrane, cytoplasm, nucleus? We'll be discussing these 3 in detail. You don't need to worry about what are their definitions, what do they do, where are they present, in what kind of cells are they present, are there any cells where we will not find these features. So you don't need to worry about that because we'll be discussing these 3 in details. So in our today's class, we'll be simply focusing on plasma membrane. Okay. So what are the 3 features? Plasma membrane, cytoplasm, nucleus, and in almost every cell, irrespective of their shape and size, we will find these 3 features. And in fact, it is because of because of the presence of these three features that the interaction within a cell and interaction of a cell with the outside environment is possible. Okay, so shall we start the plasma membrane? Let's do. So we have the plasma membrane. What is a plasma membrane? So plasma membrane is the outermost covering of a shell. It is the outermost covering of a shell. It separates the content of the cell from the external environment. Imagine a cell to be a room, and that room has walls. What does the walls do? The walls will separate the inside content of the room from that of the outside content of the room. So if the cell is a room, then the walls surrounding that particular room will be our plasma membrane. So what is plasma membrane? It is the outermost covering of a cell. This outermost covering will protect the cell, and it will also separate the cell from the inside and the outside. The inside content will be separated from the outside content. Okay? So it separates the contents of the cell from the external environment. And since it is separating the inside and the outside of the cell, that is why plasma membrane is also known as cell membrane. Let us look at the cell again. This is the general representation of a cell. The outermost covering is the plasma membrane. What is plasma membrane? It is a protective covering. It is a boundary protective covering, and it separates the inside and outside of the cell. And plasma membrane is also known as the cell membrane. This is the general representation of a cell. But do you know what does a detailed structure of plasma membrane looks like? This is how a plasma membrane looks like. This is the structure, the actual structure of a plasma membrane. But this is a very complex structure which we will not be discussing in class 9. Okay? In class 9, we simply need to know what is plasma membrane, what is the function of plasma membrane. Okay? Those things we need to know, but we do not need this complex structure. So we will discuss this complex structure, but in our higher classes. In class 9, we will not be discussing this structure. We simply need to know that what is plasma membrane. It is the outermost covering of a cell. Okay. Now this plasma membrane, it is flexible. Plasma membrane or cell membrane is flexible, and it is made of organic molecules called proteins and lipids. What is it made of? It is made of organic molecules called proteins and lipids. And this cell membrane or this plasma membrane is very, very small, which cannot be observed via our naked eyes. So we cannot simply see it with our naked eyes. We can only observe it under a very strong microscope, such as an electron microscope. So structure of the plasma membrane or cell membrane can only be observed through an electron microscope. This plasma membrane that we are talking about, this plasma membrane is selectively permeable. Okay, it is selectively permeable. Now what do we mean by selectively permeable? Selectively permeable meaning this plasma membrane or the cell membrane will only allow specific substances to pass through it. The exit and entry of substances to and from a cell will be very selective. It will not allow each and everything to enter a cell, and it will not allow each and everything to exit a cell. There are certain things that a cell needs. For example, water. For example, oxygen. There are various nutrients. There are various important ions that a cell needs. But if we talk about water, there may be impurities present in water. There may be some unnecessary, unwanted substances present in the water. So what this cell membrane or what this plasma membrane does is that it will take up only the water, and it will prohibit or it will restrict the other unwanted substances from entering the cell. Similarly, inside the cell there are many things. For example, we have important fluids that a cell needs. We have important nutrients that a cell needs. There are many organelles present inside the cell. So the cell membrane or the plasma membrane will prohibit this cell organelles to move out from the cell. It will prohibit the important nutrients to move out from the cell. So cell membrane or plasma membrane is selectively permeable. In short, we can say that the entry and exit of substances from inside or to outside the cell is selective. Or we can also say that the plasma membrane is a semi-permeable membrane. Now, plasma membrane is flexible. Okay, it is flexible, and it is because of this flexible nature that, let's look at this point. It is because of this flexible nature that the cell membrane enables the cell to perform endocytosis. Okay, what is endocytosis? Endocytosis is a cellular process. Okay, it is a cellular process, and endocytosis is not performed by any organism. Endocytosis is performed by certain organisms, for example, amoeba. What is amoeba? We discussed about amoeba last class. Amoeba is an unicellular organism. It has only one cell. So all the functions that this organism need to perform, for example, movement, for example, gathering of food, for example, eating food, digesting food, excretion of food, all these functions that one single cell needs to perform all by itself. So amoeba performs endocytosis. Now let us look into endocytosis in details. Okay, so endocytosis is a cellular process. What is endocytosis? Endocytosis is a cellular process in which substances are brought into the cell by capturing it from outside the cell with the cell membrane. For example, amoeba. Amoeba needs to gather food. Amoeba needs to get food from outside, from its external surrounding. So what this cell membrane of amoeba does is that it will gather food from outside the surrounding, okay, and it will allow that food to get inside the cell. See, substances are brought into the cell. Which cell? The amoeba cell, by capturing it from outside the cell with the cell membrane. And why or how is endocytosis possible? It is only possible because of the flexible nature of the cell membrane or the plasma membrane. Okay. Now next, all this I have been saying that plasma membrane is a semi-permeable membrane. It allows entry and exit of selective substances. It does not allow all kinds of substances to pass through it. Yes, I have been saying all these words, but how does this movement take place? How does a substance move from outside a cell to inside the cell, and how does a substance move from inside the cell to outside the cell? What is the mechanism of movement? How does it move? How do substances move around? So here we need to study about the processes responsible for movement of substances. Okay, movement of substance from inside the cell to the outside or from outside the cell to the inside. What are the processes and what is the mechanism of that process? Okay, so substances move across the cell membrane by a process called diffusion. What is diffusion? Now diffusion is something that which we have already discussed in our previous chapters. For example, matter in our surrounding. We have already discussed about diffusion in matter in our surrounding. What is diffusion? Let us see. It is a spontaneous movement. Okay, what is diffusion? It is a spontaneous movement of a substance from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. Spontaneous movement of substances from a region of high concentration, a region where that substance is present in high concentration, it's in bulk, to a region of low concentration where there is less amount of that substance. Okay, so from higher concentration to lower concentration, this spontaneous movement, this is known as diffusion. And how do substances move from inside of the cell to outside or from outside of the cell to inside? Via this process called diffusion. Let us take an example. Okay, there are many things that a cell needs. For example, we have water. Cell requires water for various purposes. Cell requires oxygen. Cell requires nutrients, and nutrients can be in the form of many ions. Okay, some necessary ions. So these are things that a cell requires. For example, we have 5 water molecules. Okay, we have more than 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 water molecules outside the cell. And inside the cell, we have only 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have only 5 water molecules. Now, outside the cell, we have a higher concentration of water. And inside the cell, we have a lower concentration of water. Now, water is something that a cell requires. So, what the plasma membrane does, that it will allow water to move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration. So water will be moving from outside the cell to the inside of the cell. Okay. Similarly, suppose we have oxygen. Suppose there is higher concentration of oxygen outside the cell, and inside the cell there is a lower concentration of oxygen. So oxygen is something that a cell requires for many different purposes, for many different functions to perform. Okay, so in that case, what the plasma membrane will do is that it will allow oxygen to move from a region of higher concentration, that is from the external environment to the internal environment of a cell. Okay, now this is about movement of necessary substances. Every living organism produces waste. Okay, similarly, a cell will also produce waste. Cellular waste, carbon dioxide is the cellular waste. Carbon dioxide is a cellular waste that cells produce. Okay, now this is a cellular waste. A cell do not need waste. Okay, so cellular waste will be produced inside the cell. It does not need this waste, so the cell will try to expel out the waste. It does not need the waste, it will try to throw out the waste. So what happens? Let me remove this part. When a cell produces waste, carbon dioxide for example, waste concentration is higher inside the cell. Okay, and waste concentration will be lower outside the cell. So what the plasma membrane will do is that it will allow this waste, this carbon dioxide, to move from inside the cell to the outside of the cell. Why? Because inside the cell there is a higher concentration of waste, there is a higher concentration of carbon dioxide, and outside the cell the concentration is low. So it will move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. And how will it move? What is the process involved? The process involved is diffusion. This is all about movement of gases, movement of ions. Okay, this is all about that, and the process involved is called diffusion. But if we talk about movement of water, particularly water, then the movement of water from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration is known as osmosis. That process is known as osmosis. Okay, so what is osmosis? The movement of water through a semi-permeable membrane. Through a semi-permeable membrane is called osmosis. If water is moving from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration through a semi-permeable membrane, then that process is known as osmosis. Now the difference between diffusion and osmosis, we have discussed this in matter in our surrounding as well. Yes, so let me do a quick recap of what we discussed. Is that diffusion is the spontaneous movement of substances from higher concentration to lower concentration with the semi-permeable membrane may be present, may not be present, it does not matter. Okay, the spontaneous movement, that is known as diffusion. But osmosis is the movement from higher concentration to lower concentration, and a semi-permeable membrane needs to be present. It is a must thing. Okay, a semi-permeable membrane needs to be present, and only with the presence of semi-permeable membrane, the movement of water from a higher concentration to lower concentration region will be termed as osmosis. Okay, so how do gases move from one place to another place in a cell? Via diffusion. How do water move? Via osmosis. Okay, so osmosis can also be termed as a special case of diffusion. Osmosis is a special kind of diffusion. What is the difference? The difference is the presence of the semi-permeable membrane. Okay, in diffusion the semi-permeable may be present, may not be present, it does not create any hindrance. But in osmosis, a semi-permeable membrane needs to be present. It is a must-have thing. Okay, so I think this part is done. Now let us talk more about osmosis. Osmosis is affected by the amount of substance dissolved in water. What do we exactly mean by that statement? Osmosis is affected by the amount of substance dissolved in water. To better understand that statement, let us take three cases. Okay, so let us take a living cell, maybe animal cell, maybe plant cell, it does not matter, but let us take a living cell and place it in a medium. Okay, so this is our living cell and we are placing it in a medium. Do I need to label this with? So this is our living cell and we are placing it in a medium. If the medium is water, or if the medium is very, very dilute, meaning if the water concentration is higher in the medium than inside the cell, then what will happen? In the medium, we have higher concentration of water, and inside the cell, the concentration of water is low. So osmosis will take place here. Yes. So what the plasma membrane will do is that it will allow water to flow from, it will allow water to move from a region of higher concentration, that is medium. It will allow water to move from a region of higher concentration to a region of lower concentration, that is inside the cell. So we will see that water will be moving from outside the cell to inside the cell. Why? Because outside the cell we have a higher concentration of water, and inside the cell we have a lower concentration of water. So the plasma membrane will allow water to move from outside to inside the cell. What will happen when water will move from outside the cell to inside the cell? When that happens, the cell will swell. The cell will swell because water is moving from outside the cell to inside the cell. So obviously the cell will swell. Okay. Now let us look here. Outside medium has a high water concentration as compared to inside. We have already discussed this. The medium has a higher water concentration, or we can say that it is very dilute as compared to inside part of the cell. As a result, water will come inside the cell. As a result, osmosis will take place and water will come from outside to inside the cell, and the cell will swell. The cell will swell up. Okay, and this type of solution is known as a hypotonic solution. So what is hypotonic solution? Outside the cell, the water concentration is more, so water will move from outside the cell to inside the cell. As a result, cell will swell, and this is known as a hypotonic solution. Now do not get confused when I say that water is moving from outside the cell to inside the cell. Water will move from outside to inside and also from inside to outside the cell. Both way it is possible, and both processes will be taking place simultaneously. But the net result will be that from outside the cell to the inside the cell, the movement will be more. The net result is that, and as a whole, our final result will be that the cell will swell up. Okay. Now what if we take the same cell? What if we take the same cell and put it in a medium where the outside medium is very concentrated? Not in terms of water. Okay, let me frame it in some other way. We are taking a cell, a living cell, an animal cell or a plant cell, whatever cell it may be. We are taking a living cell, and we are placing it in a medium. And the medium this time, for example, let us take salt solution. Okay, for example, salt solution. We are taking the medium in such a manner that the salt solution, the amount of salt is more and the amount of water is less. Okay, it is a highly concentrated salt solution, meaning the amount of salt is more and the amount of water is less. So as a whole, we can say that the concentration of water outside the cell, that is the concentration of water in the medium, is less as compared to that inside the cell. So outside the cell we have low concentration of water, and inside the cell we have high concentration of water. Inside the cell we have higher concentration of water, and outside the cell we have a lower concentration of water. Why? Because the medium is a highly concentrated salt solution. The amount of salt is more and the amount of water is less. So in that case, what will happen? Osmosis will take place. Obviously, osmosis will take place. How? Water will move from outside to inside or inside to outside the cell. Since inside the cell the water concentration is high and outside it is low, so this time what will happen? The water will move from inside the cell to outside. The water will move from inside the cell to the outside medium, to the external environment. Okay. So as a result, the cell will shrink this time. Substances are moving from inside to outside, so the cell will shrink. Let us look into the theory. Outside medium has low water concentration as compared to inside. Okay. As a result, the cell will lose water. The cell will lose water, or the cell or the plasma membrane will allow water from inside the cell to move outside the cell. Okay. The cell will shrink. As a result, the cell will shrink, and this type of solution is known as hypertonic solution. What was the first case? The first case was hypotonic solution, where the cell will swell up, and the second condition is that of hypertonic solution, where the cell will shrink. Okay, both the cases are done. Both you understood both the cases? Okay, very good. Next we need to study about isotonic solution. Same thing we will do. We will take a living cell, maybe plant cell, maybe animal cell, it does not matter. We will take a living cell and we will place it in a medium. The medium, the outside medium this time has same concentration of water as compared to that of the inside of the cell. The outside concentration, okay, let me write that. In the medium, the concentration of water is same as compared to that of the inside of the cell. So both inside and outside, the concentration of water will be same. There is no high region, there is no low region. Both the sides we have same concentration of water. So outside medium has exactly the same water concentration as inside the cell. Outside medium has exactly the same concentration as inside the cell. As a result, what will happen? As a result, there will be no overall movement of water. Movement of water will take place. Water will move from inside the cell to outside and outside the cell to inside. Both the processes will be taking place simultaneously. Overall, there is no net movement. Okay, both the processes will be taking place in equal amounts. So the amount of water moving from outside the cell to inside is equal to the amount of water moving from inside the cell to the outside. So both the processes are taking place in equal amounts. So the overall or the net movement is 0. And in such cases, the cell size will not change. Cell size does not change. The size of the cell will not change. In first case, the cell swelled up. In second case, the cell shrinks. But in third case, the cell size and the cell shape will remain same, will remain constant. And this type of solution is known as isotonic solution. Are you clear with this? Okay. So hypotonic, hypertonic and isotonic. 3 types of solutions. And these are the 3 solutions, and we have also discussed about osmosis. Again, let me remind you that osmosis is taking place all the 3 cases. Okay, but the net movement is, in case 1 it is outside to inside, net movement in case 2 is inside to outside, and net movement in case 3 is 0. Okay, so this was all for today's class. But before wrapping up the class, let us do a quick summary of what we learned in our today's class. In our today's class, we learned that there are 3 features which are present in almost every cell. Okay, almost every cell, and it is because of the presence of these 3 features that interactions within the cell and interaction of the cell with the external environment is possible. What are the 3 features? The 3 major features are plasma membrane, nucleus and cytoplasm. And in our today's class, we discussed about cell membrane or plasma membrane. Now, the cell membrane is the outermost covering of a cell. We already discussed about that. It is the outermost protective covering of a cell. It is selectively permeable, or we can also say that it is semi-permeable membrane. The entry and exit of substances take place by diffusion. Okay, it is selectively permeable. Not all substances will be allowed in, not all substances will be allowed out. So the entry and exit, what is the process involved in that? The process involved is diffusion. And we also discussed about osmosis. What is osmosis? Osmosis is a special kind of diffusion where a semi-permeable membrane needs to be present no matter what. Then we discussed about hypotonic, hypertonic and isotonic. Cell will swell up in hypotonic solution, the cell will shrink in hypertonic solution, and the cell size will remain the same, or it will remain constant in an isotonic solution. So this was everything that we have discussed in our today's class. In the next class, we will be going one step further and we will be discussing about cell wall. Cell membrane we discussed in our today's class. Next class, we will be discussing about cell wall. Okay, so this is all for today. Thank you for joining my today's class, and if you want to see more of the content, please join my next class. So this is all. Thank you.